As I said, our Friday night regular former Queensland Liberal Premier and the Lord Mayor of Brisbane, the biggest council in the state, joins us. Campbell, do we need to have a debate about how many councils every city in the country has?
Well, look, I think Dean was making some great points and, I think there is a case for amalgamation of councils in various parts of Australia. It's been very politically difficult for various leaders, premiers who've tried that. Peter Beattie had quite a fight on his hands when he tried it in Queensland, and he did do some amalgamations. I know that in Tasmania they have an enormous amount of councils for a very small population of only around 500,000. So I think there is a case, but it has been politically difficult. But to the point that Dean was making, I just want to make another point on top of that. I totally agree with his concerns, and I think what we've seen in that particular council in Melbourne is just outrageous, just so disrespectful. But this is what really needs to happen is that when we go to a council election as voters, and we should take attention of this, we need to hose these people out of office. We need to put in place people who are decent, hard-working, community-minded people who know what the role really is. And that's the secret here. That's what we really need, mate. No, not more rules and regulations and codes of conduct. We need people to put their hand up and stand, and we need great people to be elected.
100%. I mean, if you were still the Lord Mayor of Brisbane, how hard would you be banging on the door of Premier David Crisafulli saying, mate, these marches that we're having every weekend, Saturday, Sunday, particularly in Sydney and Melbourne, but also Brisbane, mate, you've got to stop them because it's ruining our CBDs and we can't put up with it anymore.
This has been a really difficult one for me, Steve. You've talked about it with me in the last year or so on this show because I'm a member of the Libertarian Party. And the last thing I want to do is curb people's rights to protest. What I say to you this evening is, over the last 2 years, though, time and time again, we've seen the display of the symbols of declared terrorist organisations. We've seen chants that, as far as I'm concerned, as a layman, as a citizen, cross the line. We have hate speech laws. The trouble is they haven't been enforced. The very night of that infamous protest at the Opera House, people, it's reported, fired flares at the sails which were being lit up in the colours of the Jewish state. Now, if you or I did that, if we went down there this afternoon and did that, I can tell you now we'd have been hauled away by the police. But the police that evening only arrested one person, as I recall, and it was a Jewish gentleman. So here's the problem. For 2 years, we have not seen the law enforced in a whole variety of scenarios. And we've not seen the book thrown at people by magistrates, for example, as well. Invasions of restaurants in the CBD of Melbourne. I think those people got off quite lightly. So that's what needs to happen, mate. I don't think we need new higher gun laws. We need the authorities to enforce the laws and get their act together in terms of, who's owning guns and if they're on a terrorist watch list. We don't need more hate speech laws. We need the laws that were used against Andrew Bolt, who works on this network. They were used effectively against him as a right-wing speaker. And we saw the QUT case where young students were dragged in to the process on 18C. So, that's what I would do. Sorry for the long answer, but that's how this thing would have been shut down and quelled, and we wouldn't have got to Bondi Sunday night.
On the Bondi massacre and the political responses since, I couldn't help but compare the comments made on this network by former Prime Minister John Howard, who was interviewed and then went to Bondi armed with some flowers, and he was warmly accepted there. There was people singing out in the crowd, "Bring back John Howard." I couldn't help but compare that with Tony Burke being booed as he turned up there after dark and tried to sort of snuck in and out again, or even our own Prime Minister John Howard, who turned up very early in the morning with a very cheap-looking bunch of flowers, stayed there for 8 minutes, left and hasn't gone back. What is your interpretation of the level of leadership that we have seen from our federal government and compare it, if you can, to someone who I think's done an outstanding job, and that's Labor Premier Minns?
Well, I've been incandescent with anger and just heartbroken since Sunday night, and I watched the whole thing unfurled, and I could do a show with you on my feelings about this, mate, but as quickly as I can, we have seen no leadership from federal Labor, no leadership at all. We've seen craven political considerations about certain voting bases in Western Sydney that they're sort of wrapping in cotton wool. They don't want to offend people. Plus the great internal problem they've got in the Labor Party, which is full of anti-Semites who are anti-Israel, who just cannot help themselves. We've seen that in the reports on what happened in the Labor Federal Electorate Council of Wentworth, where they all have been quite insensitive in only recent days. So we've seen no leadership from Labor. The community get that. I hope any member of the Jewish community in Australia now would get where they really stand with federal Labor. Now, you mentioned Chris Minns. Well, I think he has done a good job in dealing with things now. But this is the bloke who never acted properly over the last 2 years. I go back to it again. Why did the New South Wales Police deal with the Opera House event of October 2023 in the lame way that they did? Now, that's something that really someone should look at. How is it on that evening there was the son, I know there was one son of a New South Wales Upper House Labor member who was down there, who's an office bearer at the time was an office bearer of the Labor Party, who's a union official, a paid union official. This is the problem, and this is why Labor have been so bad at this, because in their ranks there are people who have been anti-Israel from the beginning, from October the 7th. So, I'll give Chris Minns his due. But you see, the Labor approach in the last few days has been about obfuscation. It's about, look, we're going to do something about guns. Yep. Well, mate, Steve, it's got nothing to do with guns. It could have been a truck, it could have been knives, it could have been, God forbid, chemicals to create some sort of gas or poison. They will always find a way. It's about the ideology, and it's about putting a lid on it and finding these people and getting them out of this country if we possibly can.
Yeah, that's why we need a Royal Commission. I mean, Campbell, it's been a pleasure speaking to you every Friday night in 2025. I'd love to do it again.
Thanks.
In 2026 when we come back. So you have a good Christmas, and really appreciate your contribution. It's been fantastic. Campbell Newman there.